in your experience, like, what's the difference for scoring for animation compared to live action? Is there much difference in the creative process?
Yeah, I think there's a great difference really, because I think in general, working on animation is a much more open approach, and I think it's sort of inherited from the creative possibilities of the animation itself, and that, you know, whatever you can imagine you can draw or you can animate. And I think that sort of spirit gets seeded down into the music, because I would often have, say, a producer saying, well, what here's the Bible of the show, what do you think it should sound like? And that wouldn't really happen. And the live action stuff, it tends to be fairly prescriptive. I think they would have a fairly clear idea of what they want. But actually, there's that other acceptance of, you know, perhaps the composer might be able to come up with a palette, something new that we hadn't thought of. And then I think, because there's so much imagination in it, you do tend to be more exploratory with the instruments you use. And I love to go off for a couple of days and just think about what I remember from the Bible, and sort of some sort of arrangement, some instrument starts bubbling up, and you get to do that. So that's a lovely, you know, fortunate opportunity to have to do that. And then in the actual specifics then as well, you get to do music for such unusual things that you probably wouldn't in. I mean, I work in a show called Kiva Can Do, and it's a couple of kids, and they would imagine playtime, they imagine characters and things. And one day they imagine meeting a friendly spider who lives in the plumbing of the house, and the friendly spider has a cartoon trumpet that's broken. And so I had to come up with, what does a friendly spider playing a cartoon trumpet that's broken sound like? And that's not going to happen if you're working on Line of Duty or something. You know, that's a different day. And even the characters, I mean, all the shows, so like Space Chickens in Space was a Disney XD one, and everything was very non-human in that. So like a character, there was a school janitor who appears to be just a turquoise stick, who walks around sweeping up this turquoise stick. And he also has all knowledge of time and space, future and past. And so, you know, well, what's his theme going to be? What's his tune? The turquoise stick man. And that's brilliant. I just love how fun it is that you can really extend yourself and just think, well, let's do something different here, you know. And I've always found producers and directors very open to, you know, suggestions. What if we try this instrument, or try little funny ideas if I think of something that I think might make them laugh. They've always been fairly open to it, I think.
Yeah, you've got that sense of silliness to it, I suppose, because you're kind of, yeah, you get to think of what kids are going to enjoy about this and find funny about it as well. Like, yeah. So it must be, yeah, a nice change.
Yeah.
Then, you know, songs within an episode, then there'd be quite a technical sort of regime of when you would work on them, because obviously animators need your material to work as well. I think the demo process is less important, because usually the cast would be singing it, and obviously they're in my demos. I don't try to upstage any of the cast members. They're just so brilliant, and you know, at doing it. It's literally just information only a lot of the time. They just need something to sing along to. So you're trying to provide the energy and the mood and everything, but it's all going to be replaced with their vocals. So I usually just do it myself, and that is nothing to shout about. And then they will record it. You'll get the takes back to choose and prepare it like you would any any song you're producing. You will then send them a finished version to animate to. So if you're scoring episode 3, you might be asked, hey, can you look at episode 25? We need a song there. You won't see the episode for another 4 months, but the song needs to go way ahead down the chain to the animators. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different processes depending on what's needed from you, like, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And some I think most composers will be asked to just take a fresh look at it. You asked in terms of lyrics. Sometimes it's been said to me, you know, do what you think. Let's hear what you think. But there are a few catchphrases in the series, that characters use, and we'd love, this kind of the catchphrase for this character or that. Other times they'll want to introduce the character by name at the beginning, if there's 3 lead people involved, or sort of describe the world they're in, if there's a name in the land that they're living in or whatever. You'll be asked to get in specific things. And if a composer's just not comfortable doing lyrics, they'll usually hire a lyricist or someone, just to do that. They'll usually map out because duration will be defined by the melody, would define, that. So, I've been asked to just write lyrics as well for a composer friend the odd time. And I'll just get a melody with a brief then that I know literally how many syllables I've got to turn in, and, hopefully be evocative of the world as well that way. And sometimes I've been on a composer on a show where they really, really just wanted to sell the theme song as a very, very marketable, very highbrow A-list R&B artist was to do the theme song. So it was nothing that I would have to, see till it broadcast, that sort of thing. So it depends. Yeah, theme songs can have a life of their own after the production, and it's a cool thing to get to do, because I think especially anyone who has children or remembers being one, it's what you sing in the bath and on the ride to school, and the visuals are long gone as soon as the show's over. The theme song, okay, so the plot and the theme song stay, I think, outside of the TV needing to be there. So it's a special thing.
Yeah, it really is, definitely. Yeah, you're really bringing something special to the whole show itself. So like you just mentioned there, like you've worked with, like you said, there was R&B artists that would be doing a theme tune and stuff, but you've worked with loads of different types of artists. And I have another question for you, which would be, in terms of working with session musicians and also live performers, how have you found this process when scoring for animation? Like, is there much of a difference in the recording process, or?
Compared to live action, you mean, or compared to?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, so vocally, things are usually decided. I think in all cases, the cast have been the final, performers involved. So that's great. That takes care of the destiny of the vocal delivery, I think. I think, okay, so in terms of theme song, as always, as composers, we're trying to squeeze the quality up as much as we can with whatever budget's available to us. So, I suppose comparatively I would have seen more budget be squeezed into a theme song. You'll have a budget that might be comparable to an episode, say, in which you do the whole music, but you'll have a higher budget for a shorter amount of work needing to be delivered, but it really needs to stand up, needs to fly production-wise. So, you'll try to put in as much live gloss as you can. Invest. It is an investment. Invest as much as you can. And absolutely goes for, depending on the budget of your series, but also very much depending on the time in the episodic work. For, some shows I've seen, just even if there would have been budget to do a lot of live recording, there wouldn't have actually been much time allocated to go and do that. Where, what I mean is, you'll send your first pass of an episode. It'll only be, you'll only get notes the night before delivery, say, so there wouldn't really be time to go and prepare a full session by any means. And it's not the expectation, but along the way, you may, have a few people that you're sending cues out to. Can you drop in on these 7 points here? Just absolutely. The oxygenation of live players changes everything. So I think we're always looking for opportunities to do that. All of us, I would say.
Yeah.
And it just brings humanity. It's just any
definitely.
excuse to bring in other people when you're on the long haul. You're there for a year, probably 9 months to a year on a show. You really, any excuse to see other people or talk to them, you grab. So next I just wanted to chat kind of about the collaborative process. I know that you've all have experience in this, but Mark, I actually had a question for you. And I just wanted to know, how does it work with a global co-production where, you're delivering to big players such as like Netflix and Disney? How does the creative direction process work here, and how have you found it in your experience?
Well, I suppose the interesting thing is you tend to get more notes. So there are a lot more kind of, the pie is divvied up in many different directions. So you would do an episode of music for something for Nickelodeon or something for Disney. And I guess depending on how the independent producer in Ireland or in the UK has kind of done their deal with the global broadcaster and whatnot, you could find that you get notes from the broadcaster, then you get notes from the producer, then you maybe get notes from the director as well. So suddenly you're navigating this kind of 3D, bunch of Excel spreadsheets with all these different people coming in with thoughts about the music. And one of the kind of interesting things to have to do is to work out what's the most strong creative voice, because a lot of the time you'll get notes and it'd be like one person would be going, oh, it's 6 minutes 2 seconds, what you did there was amazing, let's do that for a bit more. And then in another column there'll be somebody who'll be like, yeah, we don't need any music at 6 minutes 2 seconds. So the composer has to go, I'm going to go for you this time. So it's definitely the case that broadcasters. We're on something at the moment for Channel 5 for Milkshake in the UK, and definitely we're getting like production company notes, and then we do that, and then broadcaster notes kind of come at the end, and it's more just like a kind of polish. So it's not very much at all. It can be kind of nothing for an episode, or just one or two things, but they can be quite minimal. I mean, the one thing, it's in some ways it's kind of the bane of every composer's life, notes. But then the other thing I think which is really positive about it is it teaches you tons of stuff, and it actually kind of teaches you how directors and producers think a little bit more, because often the composer would be like, well, I know what I need to do in this scene, it's so obvious, the anvil's about to fall on his head, I just need to do a big thing or whatever. But actually I'm quite glass half full about notes, and about when people like Disney or Nickelodeon or whatever get involved, because it's like, well, listen, goodness me, this is not your first rodeo. So happy to kind of follow your lead. So yeah, it's kind of fun. It's just there are more voices in the conversation, and you have to kind of find your way through them all to a happy place.
And juggle a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably a pro at that at this stage now, though.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And also as well, I suppose, because in the work that we do, we're kind of team of composers as well. So like everybody's different, right? Some composers are sort of parties of one, and they do the whole thing from like the very first demo to delivering episode 52, or in some cases for us, episode 80 of a series. Whereas we're a bit more like a band. So we have a kind of band sound. So it's like, okay, you're on guitar and you're on drums and you're on bass and then it's kind of like the totality of it creates the sort of sound of the show. So you tend to have somebody still who's sort of creative lead, I suppose, or kind of like chatting to the client and whatnot. But then you have the band in the background who are kind of doing the work in collaboration, and everybody's sort of pulling together towards something. And one of the things that was talked about just a little bit earlier, it's that thing whereby if you're on a really long season, like Anna was saying, if you're on something for like a year and a half, or like we've been on things for 3 years, you need that kind of like, it's cool to have a team because you have that energy level just as high, because you're benchmarking all your work against each other. So that can be, I think that can be really handy as well. Especially if for one of the shows we're doing at the moment, we do the songs as well as all the underscore music and stuff as well. So it's like, and it's 52-part series, 26 songs, and we do 2 demos for each song. And that's just like one thing that runs. So it's cool sometimes to work as a team, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say it definitely helps to kind of keep morale up and stuff as well. And you all actually have experience in doing that. I think you've all kind of collaborated with different composers on the same projects over time, and you can probably all agree with what Mark is saying there as well. The next thing I just wanted to talk about was about composers working in Ireland. So Giles, I actually have a question for you. So kind of basically, like, where do screen composers originate from? Do you think there's a specific set of skills that someone needs to have, or a specific way of composing for media and animation?
I think in general, composers come from so many different backgrounds. I mean, I think even everyone here has a completely different background. From people who've played in bands or worked in theatre, or worked in post-production even, or or have been performers themselves, you know, musicians. So there's no hard and fast rule for composers, in my experience. Like my own background would have been, you know, playing a lot of instruments when I was younger, and like studying a lot of music and playing in orchestras and singing in choirs and things like that. And then kind of getting into music technology, and then kind of combining the two things together. And it kind of evolved into this kind of really kind of interest in sound and music. So for me, you know, becoming a composer for media was kind of like a hobby thing to start with, because, you know, it evolved over a very long period of time.
Yeah, and I'd say a lot of people can probably say the same thing. Like, I don't think there's any kind of specific skill set really, is there, to fall into it?
No, and a lot of the job of the composer is to work with the emotion in the story, so, and the narrative. So it's kind of like our job is really to be heard, but not heard too well either. Like, the story is the most important thing, but we just drive the story, you know, we drive the narrative. So that's kind of a really big part of what we do.
Yeah, and in terms of composing for animation, like, you know, is there a specific skill set for that in general, or is it basically what you just said there kind of all falls under the same umbrella?
Well, I have to say, like, when I started, my first animations that I ever worked on were short films, and that was a great lesson in how to learn how to score. And, you know, you know, there's so it's a very difficult area in terms of emotion and story and timing and things like that, and it's a really long learning process. And I found when I eventually started on my first series, it was quite intimidating in terms of you know, operating at a very, you know, a different level in terms of not only having to produce the score that's really working really well with the story, but also to do it in a very short space of time. So so that was my experience of getting into the whole area. I mean, I really enjoy scoring for animation because it's just so much fun, and just as Jonathan was saying earlier, I just love all the kind of funny things we get to do. Like he was saying, I had to have a you know, the Loch Ness monster living in a pond, listening to lullaby bagpipe music, which was really great fun to do. Like, and the same thing with just like broken instruments, and, you know, I tend to, when I'm away anywhere, I tend to like buy, just if I ever see like percussion instruments or flutes or anything, I have a big box where I just like throw them in, and then you never know, in a series you might just find a space for them. So that's
Did you find yourself digging in that box then?
Yeah, you just root around the
perfect.
box, and here's an ostrich egg with, you know,
Exactly what I need.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
for
no,
this ostrich, you know, he's actually shaking an ostrich egg or whatever. Yeah, so that's
yeah,
great.
that sounds great. So next, well, kind of the last topic that I wanted to chat about is the theme of this today. So it's just, you know, the growth of composing for screen and the growth in animation in Ireland. So I have a question. This is for the panel, and just to say, like, have you personally found the level of work for composing for screen is in line with the growth of animation here in Ireland? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, I think so. I think there's more opportunity than ever. And if you even look at things like the RTE shorts and stuff that were on just before Christmas, there's a real sense of like a pipeline of development that composers can sort of track between, you know, kind of, and in the north of Ireland as well, kind of the small funded projects that might be like a minute, 2 minutes long, through to something that might go towards, you know, Cartoon Forum for a pilot, and then, you know, maybe kind of doing a kind of, you know, low on spec or something job for like an early, and then if something gets commissioned, then kind of moving on to that, and then up to features. I mean, one thing, you know, that's really exciting is obviously looking at the kind of features element as well. So when you kind of track through, as I bet all of us do, anytime there's like a film or a TV show, we're all like, oh, I wonder who's doing the music for that. Oh, right, okay. It's always good when it's like an Irish face or some Irish faces. Like, it's so amazing that Keela do, you know, so much work like Wolf Walkers recently and stuff. It's just, I don't know. I always feel like I want to just like high five someone when I see it's an Irish composer on something that ends up with an Oscar nomination. So I think, you know, the more that kind of production companies, right down to people doing their first film, can kind of check out what's going on in Ireland composer wise, it's just a win for everybody, because, you know, the cream just rises. And yeah, I definitely would like to think so. So there's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, yeah, it's such a small industry here in Ireland, and everybody knows each other. And it's just like you said, it's so nice to see familiar names and faces on things. And it's just, it gives you, you know, a sense of achievement for everybody. It feels like we were all in on it. Yeah. So does anyone else have, like, what would your opinions be on that? Just in terms of growth?
In my experience, that the Irish productions I've worked on have so often been co-productions with other countries, that it's just been such an opportunity to work internationally with, well, and to end up on TV in Australia as well. You know, just to understand, it's just very refreshing. Working in different cultures, even though you're basically within the project the whole time. Just different work ethics and different expectations. It's just very healthy for yourself as a composer, because you're completely isolated when you're doing this. You are stuck for such a long time. The expectations are now obviously constantly online, but, you know, there was obviously for me no flying to the country of the director I worked in. I never got to meet any of them, but you all know that's the way life is now. Everything's online. But yeah, I just felt that the influence of the creatives around the world was absolutely fascinating to work on. Yeah, and the pride in which, you know, where Ireland is asked to provide Sound of Music, say, together, the confidence that co-producers have to come, to say, absolutely, your composers have been doing this for decades, and the shows have been really successful. And yeah, I think it's just so healthy. Yeah,
definitely. And have you guys, like, have you found it relatively easy to, you know, pitch alongside the animation studios, you know, when they're going for something like would you be involved in, you know, in that process? Silence.
I mean, I don't mind coming back in. Jonathan, you go ahead.
Okay, no, I just say yes. I think so. There just seems to be just a lot of opportunities, isn't there? And a lot of dialogue, and then when you're talking to people involved in the industry, say, oh, there'll be stuff coming up next year. We'll give you a shout, and you get to pitch a few things of it. And I don't have an agent or anything like that. It's I would have said fairly convivial, and yeah, I think there just is. There's a lot of opportunities in between totally local stuff, and as Anna says, the co-production stuff, and yeah, I think it's really changed things for me. I'm very, very glad of it, that it's there and it exists, you know.
Yeah, that's great. So that kind of brings me on to the next point. So I just wanted to chat quickly about the work of the Guild. So Giles, I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about the work of the Guild with us.
Yeah, no problem. The Guild was set up a couple of years ago by composers, 4 composers. It's made up of our CEO, Sarah, and then there's a board, and all the board members are composers. And the aim of the Guild is to improve the status and the rights of Irish screen composers. And our focus for the start has been on kind of training, networking, and advocacy. Sarah works away in the background, and the board provides her with strategic guidance. So in terms of training, I don't know if you all know, there's been a number of events over the last couple of years. Obviously, it's been affected by COVID, but we've still had a lot of online training events. Then there will be the networking, which obviously has been affected as well, but we're doing obviously we do like Zoom coffee chats and things like that, and there's a Facebook group. And then on the advocacy, which Sarah works away in the background, doing a great job on issues such as the Copyright Directive, Section 481, and working on the value of music. And she would also communicate with the government bodies and the stakeholders, our funders, And the thing is, it's open to any composer in Ireland to join. So yeah, feel free to contact Sarah.
Yeah, so you're just, you know, it's creating a community for everybody, isn't it? And you're all just kind of looking out for each other. Like, I'm sure you've all kind of noticed the benefits already from being in the guilds. Like, it's nice just to kind of have that, isn't it?
It's really great. Like, I think we'd all, you know, we all get to chat to each other now, and there's a great feeling amongst the members. It's really great.
There's also a thing as well, which is that, and I've definitely found it as a composer for MIDI, you tend to fall between two stools. So there's obviously, you know, for example, like Animation Ireland, or there's like Northern Ireland Screen, they deal with kind of like, you know, producers and kind of IP owners working in media and whatnot. And then in Ireland, you have like Music from Ireland, or, you know, things that are working with people who are kind of primarily in kind of music, so like bands and songwriters and whatnot. So people who work in kind of transmedia projects, so between music and, which is what we all do. Historically, it's been the case a lot of the time that it's like, oh, well, where do we kind of go to? Are we sort of, well, we're kind of being paid, you know, by film and TV companies, but we're not producers. And then we're kind of musicians and composers and stuff, but we're not in bands. So it's not like we're going to, you know, be playing, you know, hardworking class heroes or kind of going to whatever. So one of the things I think is like most important about the Guild for kind of composers and kind of music rights holders is that it's a kind of home to go to, where we can all kind of be together as people kind of work in the same area with the same things, you know, the same concerns to do with kind of copyright, or to do with kind of music on SFOs, or to do with kind of, you know, yeah, rights management around, you know, all this sort of stuff, because we're not really represented formally because we do this thing between two different stools. So I think like that's one of the happiest things for me about the Guild, is that
proper representation. Everybody needs that. So now I'm going to move on to some of the audience Q&A. So I've got some questions here that people have sent in. So the first one is, when picking the tone and sound for a score, what do you look at specifically within a project? Does anyone want to jump in and answer that? Any takers?
It was kind of like what I said about the Bible of the show, as I said at the start. It's a sort of it's like the texture and the feeling that you get from the show. I think that it's a lot of these initial concepts are so kind of vibey. Like it's to me anyway, it does represent a certain, I hear a certain type of music first, based on just the images and the texture and how it's designed and the types of stories. Like if there's a thing at the moment I'm doing is Pins and Nettie, is Daily Madness thing, and it's about two shy hedgehogs, and it's a sort of a vulnerable, it's a sort of a vulnerable characters. And so that kind of, there's something about that, you know, a softness to it that will just feed into the tone you employ, and then the instruments you use, and like your choice of instruments or something like that, with the look of the animals, say, that the way they're designed. So that's, I think it's a kind of an instinctive thing that we've all been doing music so long, that music and instruments and arrangement maybe feel like certain things, you know. Sort of, you think that seems to equal that. That's the way I feel about it anyway.
Cool, thanks. The next question is for Mark, and it said, so Mark, you really need negotiation skills. Is that ever disheartening as a composer and as a creative person?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the, it's one of the hardest things, is doing all of, you know, we all, like, I mean, who wants to be a networker and go out all the time and meet people and be like, hey, I'm a composer? Because you know, I kind of sometimes feel, I go to the CMC, the Children's Media Conference in England, and sometimes I kind of rock up to people and they're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm a composer. And they're like, yeah, I don't really want to talk to composers. I want to talk to like buyers and kind of like co-producers and stuff. So let alone negotiate, you know, when you see a contract and you have to kind of make sure you're protecting your rights and kind of getting, you know, your kind of remuneration and whatnot as well. That whole part of it, the non-creative part of it, is not something that I think comes naturally to anybody. But, you know, as Jonathan was saying, like, I don't have an agent, you know, it's just me. I'm the rainmaker. So you have to just kind of put that hat on and try and go out. That's why I love going to Dingle, you know, usually for the conference, because it's such a great opportunity just to kind of like sit and meet people and not do kind of like hard selling. Oh, I really want to do music for your thing, but just kind of, yeah, gentle networking by the sea. But it's not easy, and it's a really hard thing for composers to have to do. It's like a left brain, right brain thing, because the same person who you're about to go on this like mad journey with for 52 episodes, you also have to be pushing back, going, "That's not right, is it?" So yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. I sometimes wish I could duplicate myself or have someone who is like bad cop. Because we just want to do the work. We want to be like, oh, let's just get this negotiation out of it so we can get into episode 1 and like start talking about the theme tune. Like, do you hear marimba? I hear marimba. But yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's a juggling act, really, isn't it? So the next question says, so the earliest cartoons were very tightly timed out to the musical scores in a way that's not too common nowadays. Thinking of Disney's Steamboat Willie is a common example. As composers, have you worked on any projects where the music was as vital to the beats of the story and the characters' movements as music would have been in the cartoons of the 20s and 30s?
I'll take that if you like. I think the mind-blowing difference between what we do and what they do is more in that we have technology to map everything out for us and they didn't. It's just, yeah, we'd really know who was good at this if our sequence words were taken away from us. Yeah, I mean, that's so much of what you do in episodic TV. I think it's, what would you call it, Mickey Mousing, I suppose. You know, you're reinforcing the energy. It's obvious where the hit points are a lot. A director or any producer will not sit down with you each episode and give you time codes of what to hit. It's, you just you get it. You know, you get it when you pitch, or you don't, and you don't get the job. It's very obvious. Sometimes you'll be told to add more to that, but it's, thank goodness for, yeah, our DAW, everything will be mapped out. You literally can drop a pin and have your computer work out your tempo if you want, or you'll just feel it. You know, I like to conduct a scene and just tap a space bar when there's a hit, and then I've got that 25 seconds or that 1 minute 25 mapped out. So I think actually it becomes more of a challenge to step away from that in so much of this. It's, you know, to let a scene breathe as well. Not everything is a chase scene, and just to work away from your sequencer, to be writing your melody without feeling like a slave to how many beats you've got between here and there. And that's probably the ultimate commanding force. But yeah, to step away and write for the soul of what's going on in the scene is more, more a challenge I certainly have to remind myself to do. It's very easy just to obey your sequencer. Yeah, I hope that answers sort of.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question is a good one as well. Is it important to know music theory and to be able to read sheet music to work with the music? What do you guys think from your experience?
I think it probably helps, but it's not 100% necessary. I mean, with obviously, if you're using computers, you could probably do it without it. Well, I suppose I only have experience of being able to read music, so I don't know if anyone else would have a better answer.
I can't sight read. I can't sight read at all, so I do it completely without. So there's an alternative perspective.
I grew up in that, you know, same as Giles, I guess, classical, everything's on paper, but I don't have time in this world. Animation, there's no time to send any players as well that I'm sending a sequence to play on. It's just by ear usually, with very rare exception. You'll do dots if you've something really, really specific, or certainly if they have 10 minutes to put it down for you. Everybody wants everyone who's a reader wants the dots and the audio to go with, but I'd say in this world, scoring for picture, everything is just here to screens in one go. You don't as necessarily have to go through paper. Yeah.
And I'd say we also, like, if we have a session player, you know, we'd send them a click track and the track, and they can, even if they can't play it in, you know, particularly perfectly or anything, we have so many tools to improve their performance in terms of, anyway, don't we?
Technology these days, amazing. So the next question is for Mark. If you could say one thing to animation directors to make the composer's life a little easier when working together, what would that be?
I think a really important thing that people skip over too quickly at the start is kind of working with the composer on a bit of a mood board for what they think the sound of the show could potentially be like. So that could be as simple as we do a lot of kind of playlists on YouTube and Spotify. We definitely include lots of music score in that, so it's handy to kind of reference music score. That part at the start, before you're actually committing and printing episode 1 and kind of signing it off, to do as much work in the early stage as possible. And definitely for all of you who are at like animatic stage, do some music at animatic, to, you know, like put some ideas in there and see what the vibe is, see if it's right. So it's about kind of really trying to refine things down as early as possible. Oh, and here's another thing as well. This is really, really important. Really important. Don't use temp score. Don't use temp score. If you're a director and you think, oh, what I'll do is I'll just bang in this piece from Fantastic Mr. Fox now, and sure, we'll just kind of like get the composer to work off that later on, or kind of we'll worry about that later. Don't use temporary score if you can. If you're thinking about a composer and stuff, try and bring them in as early as possible and have original music, even if it's just demos, as early as possible as well. It's going to make everybody's lives so much easier going forward. So those are kind of, yeah, a couple of really important things. So maybe do some mood boards early on, and I'm just going to say it again, don't use temp score. Don't use temp score. Don't do it. No.
That should be on your bio.
I was going to add to that just in any general, like whether it's animation or any area of composing, it's always lovely to get a playlist from, well, it used to be CDs, obviously that Spotify playlist from people, just to hear what kind of music that they even like or listen to, or, you know, what they're thinking, because it can tell you a lot about a lot just listening to a playlist. I find that really handy.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a question here just about the guild, and it just says, if someone wants to join Screen Composers Guild of Ireland, what are the requirements? So I can answer that. So you can go to screencomposersguild.ie, or you can email sarah@screencomposersguild.ie with any questions that you guys have. So I have another question here, and it is, where should animation students look to for help with music and sounds in their budget limited projects, please? So I'm assuming this will kind of lean towards students. Was there any recommendations that you guys would have?
In terms of sample libraries and things like that? Yeah. And I mean, there's an awful lot of, in fact, somebody posted on Twitter very recently about a huge resource of free available instruments to start with, maybe as a starting point. So I don't know, had anyone else seen that? I can try and find that link if you want, and post it up somewhere.
If the question is about whether like small filmmakers doing really small limited budget projects are looking for kind of like, you know, royalty free music, or going to kind of like a production music library or something like that, what I would say is, don't do that. Go to a composer. Because I swear, even if the budget is like, oh, my music budget is like 50 or £100, you will be able to find somebody. I mean, the guild is, you know, obviously we're here, part of the Screen Composers Guild, but you will find a composer. And the thing about animation, the reason that you want a composer as opposed to a piece of library music or production music or the temp score thing, I think I've been pretty clear about that, is with animation, it's not as if music's going to drive the cut. The composer comes to it, sees an animatic maybe, and can kind of like put something in at that point. But the next thing you get is finished animation. So you're not going to be able to get a production music or library music cue that's going to work, because it's like Anna was saying, like there is no grid. So the best thing, even for small projects, is to reach out to actual musicians, because they can work the picture, create something unique, new, that kind of is following your vision. And also, it's not like, oh, look, there's that production music cue that I heard 3 times last week in TV shows. So even it's a really small budget. And the reason composers want to get involved early days is because it's a short film now, but as I was saying earlier, it could go to flipping Annecy or to Cartoon Forum or to the CMC or to MIP Junior. And, if the composer's along for that kind of journey, then that's a cool thing for the composer as well. So that's what I would say is, like, don't go to people like Epidemic Sounds, people who are offering kind of royalty-free music and stuff like that. It's hurting our community, it's bad for our community, and it won't give you music that will be compelling for your project. Have something new, unique, and original. Go with an Irish composer.
That's a great piece of advice. And on that note, we're actually out of time. So thank you all so much for joining me today. This has been really, really interesting. And thank you to everybody watching. Tune in later today at 5 o'clock for Alison Rutland, who will be discussing animating characters. Thanks a million. Goodbye.